won't need power. Here we go. Just waiting on the green light. We're good. All right. So good afternoon. Welcome everybody. I know Dave's not going to be here today, but everybody else is here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Call the meeting to order. All right. Open up to public comment. Anybody wishing to speak, please come forward at this time.
I just wanted to drop by because I've been watching y'all on TV and thank you. I read today's packet and I want to thank each and every one of you who've made, Citizen Martha Simons, for the record. And I just want to thank everyone who contributed to today's packet. I think you're asking very thoughtful questions. I was concerned Dennis Gilkey brought up that, Chair, one of the members did bring up about Spring Creek, and I wholeheartedly concur. I think the Spring Creek restoration study should hopefully cover that, and we'll find out what some solutions will be for restoring going under I-75 or whatever. Funding, another matter, and you elucidated on that, Mr. Chair. I think it's far more complex than we had originally understood, and that is the point of having you people, and I'm so grateful for you, to ask these hard questions. You ask the experts who don't always have the answers, the hard questions too, and I think there might be a variety of opinion among experts. So your good decision-making powers will come into play, and each one of you are taking part. I'm sorry Mr. Gallagher isn't here because I was very grateful he brought up the well field. I'm very grateful someone brought up the cost estimates. That's very important consideration, and I think that we'll have more ideas coming in, and I think that can't hurt. So I'm very grateful to all of you for what you're doing. Thank you, and I watch it with great interest. Thanks.
Deborah McLean, publisher of the Banana Peel. On page 15, there's an error. I believe the word is modeled, not leveled. And on page 14, there's an error. And it escapes me right this second because I got a phone call from David Gallagher to mention that the minutes had 2 typos, just hearing issues, not content. And I too am grateful to see all the input coming from the different positions on the DRGR. And although I don't have it in front of me, I believe the ordinance that created this board mentions to get the water right. It is a water strategy task advisory board comprised of citizens selected by the 7 members that are elected in the city. So I hope that we stay focused on the water. And we have received, fortunately, reports from people who do not live here, which is imperative because they are not dependent on the local economy for their incomes and livelihoods. And therefore, their opinions are to be treasured because they are impartial. They really have nothing to gain, especially when they come for free. So I hope that you'll take Livingston and Irwin's words to heart, because as we come to a close in December, we are seeing that perhaps there will be no increase in density because we can't prove that impervious surfaces in any volume improve the water. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Task Force. Kathy McGrath for the record. You're doing an awesome job. And I would just like to read a few comments before you start. I was going to wait till later, but I think I'll do it now. My feelings are, I'm speaking about Mr. Irwin, that his proposals are unrealistic, costing millions of dollars, unneeded, and they're not really addressing the important factors, which is getting the flowways cleared and the water moving west, like Spring Creek, Jefferson, and Kiel. The city is already complying with the BMAP and reducing pollutants. And also, we must all get behind and support South Florida Water Management in acquiring the remaining parcels in Crew. To me, Mr. Irwin, and he has wonderful credentials, but he's like a physician or a doctor. He proposes this major surgery that's going to cure all your ills, but he doesn't care or discuss the cost. That's not his job. And it seems to me that the naysayers in this town, they don't want to believe anything that Johnson Engineering or Baracco says, as they don't agree with their recommendations, and they're determined to throw up so many roadblocks that council will finally say no. Now, back in March, my comments are already on record, so I won't read them again. It concerned acquiring Mr. Irwin. That contract was brought to council prior to the task force having their first meeting, and I think that's kind of like putting the horse before the cart. I really
The cart
think
before
that.
the horse.
Pardon me, sir?
Cart before the horse.
Did I say that backwards?
You said the horse before the cart,
I'm
which is the way
sorry.
it goes.
Thank you so much. I'm easily confused. I think that to talk about buying up private lands and try to restore things to 1953 is not where y'all should be going. There's no money and no justification. There are so many other places already identified that need funding for water sources. So I'm asking you, please don't continue down this path. Let's not talk about ecological restoration. Let's focus on the water. And unfortunately, this is what happens when the scope was set and this consultant was selected prior to your first meeting. And that's what I have to say, and thanks for correcting me.
Thanks, Kathy. Anyone else for public comments?
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Janet Daychuck, and I live out
Yep, there you go.
east of Bonita, and I have property involved in this study, and I don't agree with it whatsoever. I really feel like we need to get on to Southwest Florida Water Management, let them finish their project that they had started out there, and they have bought that to hold water, to control the water flow, and, you know, before we start buying more property, let them finish their project and see if it works. Why buy more if theirs works? I disagree with this completely.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Colleen Peters. I have a 5-acre parcel that is mapped out to be taken. I just want you to hear me. I'm 33 years old. I've lived here my entire life, born and raised in Bonita. Have seen the city change over and over and over in the last 33 years of my life. I have 2 young kids, and my plan is to raise them the way I was raised. And I was raised on property with horses, with cattle, chickens, hogs, dogs, all types of animals. Buggies, 4-wheelers. Any child's dream to live the way I lived. And my plan is to raise my children that same exact way. And I will build on my 5-acre parcel out there eventually. And if it gets taken from me, it's going to get ugly. But I just want you to know that that's my inheritance. That's my children's inheritance. That's all going to be taken before my eyes. That my family has worked so hard to catch in these last however many years my parents have been here. So I just hope and pray that you will reconsider this whole study, because I think it's crazy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comments?
Yes, Alex Grant, 11851 East Terry Street, also an owner of 5 acres. But I'd like to mention again, over and over again, even though nobody's listening to me about this, about getting in touch with the University of Florida Soils and Water Department, the professors there, for an impartial review of the hydric soils in the area, which causes your water problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comments? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on. Approval of the minutes from last meeting. Anybody have any comments to that? Nope.
I did get an email from Dave, and I think this is what was alluded to earlier by one of the speakers. But on page 2, 4th paragraph, the word corrected needs to be changed to the word collected. Just a matter of hearing, I think, on that.
Got a couple comments.
Go ahead.
On the top of page 2, the civil engineer that spoke to us is Steve Swaw, but it's S-U-A-U, Swaw. And then on page 4, and I didn't go back to the tape or the video and listen to this, but in the third full paragraph down, it says with the development neutrals, and I'm not sure if what that should have been, but it was. I'm sure that's not correct. But I didn't go back to the video and look at that, so if somebody remembers that or can check that. And then on page 7, at the fourth line down, it's swells should be swales, S-W-A-L-E-S. And then on page 11, on the fourth paragraph, I was talking about the 2,400 acres, and that, just to clarify, that was in Lee County. I'm pretty sure I was saying there was 20, well, maybe that says it in the line before that, and that's probably covers it in the line before that. Okay, it's in Lee County. So that's covered, okay. That's all I had, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have any corrections? We need a motion to approve those as modified.
So moved.
All right, second? Second. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. So presentation from crew. Looking forward to this one.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Steve Coughlin. I'm the section administrator for the district's land stewardship section. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon to speak to you about the crew management area and answer any questions you may have about the project or our land management activities. Acquisition of the crew management area began in 1990 with the Save Our Rivers program with the purpose of protecting the water and environmental resources within the crew watershed. The 26,000 acre management area, which is highlighted in blue here, is located in Lee and Collier counties, and it's bisected in half by the Corkscrew Swamp Audubon Sanctuary. The management area itself is composed of two very different types of land. The relatively unaltered conservation lands, which make up the majority of the area, and then the Southern Crew project lands, which have been highly altered due to past construction activities. The Southern Crew project area is located just north of Bonita Beach Road. It's about 4,000 acres in size, and it contains numerous roads and ditches and swales and berms that were constructed as part of a prior platted subdivision that was never developed. The district has a restoration plan for the Southern Crew area that includes installing ditch plugs, filling in ditches, removing roads and berms or portions thereof. Currently, the project design has been completed. The district is in the permitting phase right now, and pending approval of the permits, it'll go to construction based on the availability of funding. Hydrologically, the crew management area is very important for groundwater discharge as well as providing surface water flows southwest to Estero Bay and the Imperial River, as well as south and southeast to Picayune Strand State Forest, Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge, and the Big Cypress Preserve. The major plant communities within the crew management area is primarily wetland plant communities consisting of cypress swamp, hardwood forested wetlands, and slough and depressional marshes. Flatwoods comprise only about 9% of the area, but it's an important habitat type for area wildlife. Due to its diverse plant communities and close proximity to other conservation lands, the crew area is very productive for wildlife. It's classified by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission as a priority wetland for listed species and a biodiversity hotspot, which means it supports 5 to 7 species that on a statewide basis as they're in a population decline. Staff and cooperating partners have documented over 122 bird species that use the area, 22 different mammals, including the Florida black bear, and 18 listed species, including the Florida panther. The three primary land management activities that occur on the property are hydrologic restoration, prescribed burning, and exotic plant control. These three activities all complement each other, and when we can use them concurrently on the same piece of property, it helps bring down the land management cost for the area. As I mentioned earlier, there's a restoration plan that's been completed for the Southern Crew property, which will include the installation of ditch plugs and filling of ditches, very similar to what was used on the district's 9 Gems property in Martin County, as shown in these pictures. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a wetland before and after ditch plugs were installed. And on the right-hand side, you see the picture of what was a typical ditch plug used on the 9 Gems property. Although those for Southern Crew will need to be larger due to the size of the ditches and the volume of water that flows across the area. Exotic plant control is probably one of the most important land management activities performed on conservation lands in South Florida due to the ability of exotic vegetation to quickly degrade native plant communities and negatively impact wildlife habitat in a very short amount of time. On the Crew area, when it was first acquired, it was heavily infested with melaleuca and Brazilian pepper. Through repeated treatments, the density of both of these plant species has been reduced dramatically, and right now many portions of the area are entering what we call a maintenance phase. Funding for this has been provided both in-house through the district and through state grants. Even with the success we've had to date, though, we still need to treat on the average between 3,400 and 4,400 acres of the property each year to maintain this level of control and to treat new infestations of exotics, especially species like Lygodium that typically invade the wetter areas, cypress heads, and some of the pine flatwoods. Exotic plant control obviously is our largest single operational cost on the Crew management area. Whereas exotic plant control may be one of our costliest land management practices, prescribed fire is probably our most cost-effective land management activity to maintain woody vegetation and to maintain our fire-dependent plant communities on the area. Prescribed burning recycles nutrients, it reduces woody vegetation growth that goes out into the marsh, it increases plant diversity, and like I said, it's necessary to maintain our fire-dependent plant communities. In the absence of regular prescribed fire, we would see a few loads build up, which could result in catastrophic wildfires. On the Crew area, our desire is to try to burn the area, the pine flatwoods and the marsh, on the average of once every 3 to 5 years. In order to do that, we need to average about 2,500 acres of burning each year. With its close proximity to the urbanized West Coast and the diversity of plant and wildlife species that occur in the area, the Crew Wildlife Management Area is very popular for recreation. Last year we had over 15,000 visitors that used the area, and in accordance with legislative directives, we provide for a variety of different activities on the property, including hiking on over 23 miles of established trails, biking, wildlife viewing, camping at designated campsites. Equestrian use and hunting is administered by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Before concluding my presentation, I just wanted to recognize the partnerships that we have. We have some very active governmental agencies as well as private organizations that have supported both the acquisition and the management of these properties, specifically Audubon, Lee County, Collier County, the Crew Land and Water Trust, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and the state of Florida, who's provided funding for land acquisition. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have a question. Thank
Yeah.
you for the presentation. My question, I was just out yesterday riding around buggies, taking a look, and in the control of the exotics and the ongoing controlling of the exotics, obviously there's a tremendous number of dead trees out there.
Mm-hmm.
One, the safety of the chemicals you're putting into that sheet flow and watershed, because I know you're cutting in and then applying
Atkins Squirt.
pesticides. So that is a huge question because it's ongoing. And second of all, one of the problems that we're really looking at is the amount of nitrogen. We know that grass clippings, et cetera, cause nitrogen to build up, and you have got dead trees like there's no tomorrow out there that are just rotting, and a lot of them have fallen into the ditches that are there. So they're rotting in the ditches, the water's flowing through those ditches, and I know that y'all are trying to get this project completed, but in regards, I think what I'm trying to bring up is also the point of purchasing more land that requires more management when you guys can't manage what you've got. And the situation out there is, there's all the extra burning of the homes that were there. There's garbage left over from some of the extra when you guys started the project isn't complete. The trees are rotting in the ditches, and it's just, I don't see how this is really environmentally the way that I was hoping that this area would be maintained, and particularly with the chemical use.
But I can tell you, all the exotic plant control activities we contract out there, everyone's a certified applicator through the state of Florida. The herbicides that are used are approved by the state and the federal government. They're used according to the label rates, so they're very safe in that manner. The reason you don't see the trees cut down and allowed to lay like that, but rather treat and stand up, is because as soon as you treat those melaleuca, the first thing they do is release their seed pods.
Right, but they are lying down. There's tons of them lying
Yeah.
down in all the ditches and the dikes.
Yeah, let me finish one second.
Okay.
So they leave them standing so that we know we're going to have to come back for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and bring ground crews in. And sometimes we hand pull those little seedlings. Sometimes we treat them with herbicides. But if we cut them all down immediately, let them fall, they would never be able to get those seedlings out of there, and we would have wasted all the money we spent on treating it. So we let them stand. They go in and do the follow-up treatments for, like I said, 3, 4, 5 years, and eventually those trees do come down, like you've seen.
And then they rot and put all the nitrogen in the water that we then try to filter out.
Yeah,
I
I'd
mean,
have to talk to somebody about the level of nitrogen that could add to the water. It's been pretty common practice in the water conservation areas and throughout the wetlands to treat the melaleuca and kind of leave them standing and let them fall down like that. What we'd like to do is go in afterwards where we can and do a prescribed burn, try to reduce that fuel load and burn up that way. It's pretty tricky, especially on Bonita Beach Road. You need just the right weather conditions, the right winds.
Right.
Typically it has to be a cold front coming through, so we catch the right wind as it's turning around the corner. So we're not always able to burn as much as we would like out there.
But it's a huge process, right?
Yep.
And expensive.
Land management's expensive no matter where you do it.
Okay.
A question on the Lee County side, and this is something I discussed last week, that there's about 2,400 acres on your map that shows that's, and really all of it's in either the Lee or maybe a little bit in the Bonita DRGR area. And the part that's the southern crew, I think that might be what you're talking about, Tor, is already bought.
Correct.
Yeah. And so is there a plan to buy the other scattered, and they're pretty well scattered, the other scattered 2,400 acres of parcels? Is there a budget from the state, or is there a timeline that you could explain?
There's no deadline date for acquiring those in-holdings that remain up there. It's through a willing seller program. So we would depend on folks that would want to sell their property out. And right now, it's not real high on the priority list as far as land acquisition with all the lands that was needed for other purposes.
So, and then on the southern crew, you've got the right to condemn some of that
Right.
for stacking the water up. Now, so if you had that on other areas to stack water, would you need that condemnation authority to buy those to stack water elsewhere, like north of the Kiel Canal? I mean.
Well, for Southern Crew, they went through and got the condemnation authority, which typically the district does not do, but only where it's really needed for a project like that. I don't know whether they would go to that extreme to acquire in-holdings. That would be something that would be probably decided at the executive level.
Okay.
But just to reiterate, everything within Southern Crew needed for the project has been acquired to date.
I think one of the issues that the task force had been talking about is with Southern Critical Crew and with the idea that in Bonita we need to find more areas to place additional water, additional storage, stacking the water. But Southern Critical Crew isn't that project. It's not stacking any additional water. It's just rehydrating so that subsurface, there's a little more water there, but there's no stacking of water within this project.
No, the goal of the Southern Crew project is to rehydrate the area with the water that's currently going into it, better distribute it, restore the wetlands that are currently being drained, and have a longer retention time for the water going through the area, but not to add more water to the system.
I'd seen, Nicole, somewhere, maybe it's in the notes somewhere, about 6 inches, but 6 inches over 4,000 acres is still 2,000 acre feet. It's
That was
still-
subsurface, not 6
I
inches.
know, but it's still 6 inches of water that you don't
I
have
think
today,
it
probably.
was,
I think it's
it
0.1
was,
feet.
yeah, it was to rehydrate, up to 0.6 inches below the surface, so I'm not sure how much additional
Yeah.
rehydration that would be.
Yeah, under the conclusions of the report you provided, Nicole, it said, for the investigation, the threshold for significant increase in daily average standing water depth was set at 0.1 foot outside the district property.
Less than 2 inches.
Right, so I mean, it's, if you put more than that, it could have an impact on property outside the district boundary.
Outside the 4,000
Right,
acres.
right. But I think by rehydrating that property, and primarily of the Southern Crew, it's primarily the easterly portion that gets more water, I guess is the way to say that. Then less water is coming through as quickly to the Kiel Canal. So
Correct.
hopefully in these big rain events, we're not getting all this water from the east coming into the west to also pile up with all the water.
It'll probably moderate to some degree the flow that goes out that canal, but the goal of the project is environmental restoration.
Right, and I had, you had a great slide up there, I think it was about the 6th or 7th slide, it was called Location of Regional Watershed, shows the flow of the water. Yeah, and it, in the report here that Nicole provided, there was a portion that talks about Lake Trafford.
Uh-huh.
Let me find it here for you. It's in 2.1, and it said, topographical information for the area suggests that given the current conditions, discharges from Lake Trafford can be conveyed to the west more easily than to the south. So I know that's kind of like the historical watershed and the flow, but is the plan for Southern Crew to somehow change the pattern to get more water from that area coming towards us as opposed to going to the Caloosahatchee?
No, it's just a retaining cap for the water going,
Cocohatchee, thank you.
going through the Kiel Canal and hold it back further, and through Bird Rookery Swamp, but not to divert water that's not currently coming from Lake Trafford to add water into the system.
Okay. It just caused me a little concern, saying, we don't need more water. We have enough.
Anything
So-
else?
I just wanted to make sure you said that you have already acquired all the land that is, you have acquired the required land
Or the Southern Crew
for
project?
the Southern Crew project.
Correct.
And you all feel fairly confident that those flows and that restoration will be successful in for the purpose that you took that land?
Correct.
You mentioned the Bird Rookery Swamp. I was out there hiking the other day and saw a bear and raccoon and all sorts of birds. It was fantastic.
It's a
So,
good place for wildlife viewing.
yeah.
Sometimes you view the alligators too close.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the one question I had, and I don't want to tell you how to do your business, but hiking that trail, there's only one spot where you can see that man-made lake there. Are there other locations where you can get maybe elevated to look over, because there's so many trees? It's beautiful, but
Yeah, well, we just made use of the existing tram system that was out there, like I'm sure you saw. And
did, yeah.
the property around that lake we do not own. The
I know
district
that.
does not
Yeah, I know
own.
that.
So we've been careful not to cut trees down or do anything, but rather just make use of what's there. But it is a nice view. I agree with you.
right.
I have another question. The land west of Vincent
Mm-hmm.
in Bonita, I think it's outside of Bonita Springs, but we're talking about the Southern Crew, is open for hiking and horseback riding, but then the land east of Vincent is all locked off, and you get a huge fine if you get caught on that land east of Vincent.
No, the lands are all open. You can't take, motorized vehicles in there for sure, but the lands themselves are open to public use east of Vincent. There's
So
no
I
hunting
can
allowed
cross
in
those
there.
yellow gates that go across those roads?
Yep. Yeah. We've had, history of dumping problems like you alluded to, where
Mhm.
people have backed trucks in there, dump landscaping debris, all sorts of stuff. And And it's expensive to haul that stuff out,
Well, I
so.
have photographs that I took yesterday. I was going to pass around to everybody. This is just a brand new one. It looks like somebody ripped up a trailer. All those bags are full of, I think they're all the same. All those bags are full of insulation from the inside. I'm sitting in a buggy, so that's what that corner is there. It's not a dumpster.
Not allowed to have motorized vehicles there, by the way.
No, there I was.
Oh,
There I
sure.
was. That part you can. And this is right out by our wells. It's backed up. The
Okay.
blue thing in the background is one of our wells.
Yep.
So this is the other point about acquiring great masses of land. It's hard to control and pay for what people do on that land. And this is again in regards to acquiring more land within the city limit. It's not just buying the land. And that's my point about bringing up about the control of the exotics,
Yep.
maintaining it, preserving it, saving it. So, okay.
And unfortunately, we do run into that as tipping fees go up. People are inclined to dump on lands, public, private, what otherwise.
Well, and
it's
it's-
expensive.
Right. And also, I think that a lot of people don't realize that when they pay someone to clear it out, they give them the money to take it to the dump, and then they don't. They just take it out into East Bonita. So that's hard to police.
I think Column's got
Yeah, I want to suggest to all of us, the committee, and that we invite for a presentation, hopefully at next meeting, we invite somebody to talk about Tori's issue, about what is the benefit and wisdom or lack thereof of the trees lying down and the killing of the trees and letting them rot, or whether that's possibly good for the ground because the carbon goes back into the ground and so forth. In other words, just let's talk about how it's being handled out there and what the lack of wisdom or wisdom of it is. And we could get somebody like, I don't know, we'll find the right person, but Jim Beaver is one that comes to mind, but there are others, and let's get somebody in here to talk about that, because it's not fair to ask him to answer these specific scientific questions when he's the land management.
I won't actually be at the next meeting.
Pardon me?
I'm not going to be at the next meeting. Unfortunately, I have to miss the next meeting.
We'll get somebody in here to talk about that. And
I'll see it on the TV.
Well, and I wonder, I mean, at some point, we can't micromanage how they're managing the land.
No.
I certainly I'm not opposed to getting information, but this is outside the DRGR. It affects the DRGR for sure, I understand that. But at some point, it's just gonna be information. We're not gonna be able to tell.
No, but I
Florida
think
Water
it's
Management how they're-
applicable to acquiring more land, the cost that we're looking at as a city. I think in your paper, you mentioned 400 or 500 acres. Obviously, Mr. Irwin's looking at 1,700 acres. Once you've acquired that land, and if it is not wise to leave them lying, because I think Mr. Flood at one point said it's preferred to remove them if possible. If it's not wise, then we have to budget that into what we're looking at, advising the city to do. And if that it just becomes so overwhelming as a cost. I mean, purchasing of the land, managing the land, removing the exotics, and then maintaining it is a huge burden, which Mr. Irwin has given us no figures towards.
Okay, I wasn't finished yet, but just to complete my suggestion, we invite somebody to deal with giving us some information on that issue, and that's all part of the same issue. I want to talk about the wisdom of versus the lack of wisdom of acquiring more land. Let's make it really broad, because I think that the pluses of acquiring more land way outstrip the disadvantages of it. Yes, you have to management that does cost some money and so forth, but it's a good thing that we have Everglades National Park and the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone and so forth. And the wisdom of acquiring land is great wisdom, and you deal with the costs as efficiently as you can. So I think if we could get somebody in just to give a 10-minute, a scientific 10-minute dissertation on the wisdom or the lack thereof, would be really helpful to answer those questions.
I would agree with what he has said, that we're supposed to look at different solutions, and right away we seem to rule out anything that might cost some money, whereas most governments and organizations will first look at what do you really need to do, and then they put their minds to on how to get the money to do it. And it may be a combination of ways. So I think at this point we should get all the information we can get so we can better make an intelligent decision or recommendation.
I think what Tori was referring to is within the city limits, and there are some part of the crew project is in that part of the city. But I think what you're saying is that you got the acquisition cost, you got the restoration cost, you've got things like, removal of debris and trees, and then you've got annual maintenance, and maybe 5 years or more to get it to where it really has got more of a kind of a stability of not have to spend a lot of money. And then the monitoring that goes with it. So yeah, there's a lot of expense in there.
Right, and I'm not, for 1 minute, I love public land as much as anyone else, and I'm very much for the willing acquisition of land from willing sellers.
Right.
I just think in order for us to be doing the right service to the city, we need to bear in mind the cost and feasibility of these things, because I think a lot of the things are great ideas, wonderful ideas.
Yeah.
And if people want to sell their land and be a part of this, I think it's a wonderful idea too. But we have to go in eyes open, because there might be things that are cost effective and other things that are not as cost effective. And I just found Mr. Irwin's 1,700 acres to be a pretty big, and also, I mean, it goes right across my property. It goes across my neighbor's property. It goes across people's property that has homes. And all of us are very sensitive, because as wonderful as the Southern Crew Project is, it took out a lot of our friends. It took out a lot of our, some of my friends, their grandparents lost their property. Their parents lost their property. If we're going to go in on this eyes open and everything on the table, it can't be just, well, this is a good idea.
Right. Aspirational stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
When there are other more practical things that might be more affordable, like the Jefferson Flowway, things that are already public land.
Well, one thing that we have to remember, Kevin Irwin did recommend, or at least briefly touched on, he hasn't gotten to us with all the details, but he had a very interesting idea about what to do with stacking water, and that was to put it in the Kiel Canal, which is already there, and let it during the dry season have more water in it by impounding that water in there. It's a very interesting idea at first blush, and I mean, he's going to talk about that more in the future, but that's an interesting possibility that I hope everybody heard him say, because I did heard him say it while we were sitting here. And that's a fascinating idea, rather than acquiring a bunch more land and having to pay for that. The Kiel Canal's already there.
I heard that too, but I didn't see it in the report. I know
I
we're
didn't
getting
either.
off track here,
But
yeah.
it just stuck in my head because I thought it was a fascinating idea. And I asked him a brief question about it, and he said more about it later. He said, we'll get to that. So I'm interested in hearing more about that later.
Paul, you have something?
And just one final thought, I would support having someone either provide information or give a very brief presentation
Yeah,
on
brief.
the issue of management and should the trees be cleared out. But I know as the Conservancy manages properties that we own, and oftentimes you do want to kill in place and not remove them, because bringing the equipment in to actually remove the dead debris will do more damage to the ecosystem than just leaving it in place. So it's a cost factor, but I think it's also dealing with the sensitivity of the area and the fact that those trees can provide habitat for woodpeckers and other things. So just wanted to toss that in there too.
Anything else? Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
John, I know we have larger maps that you have versus the 8.5, 11 might be easier for the committee to read, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, great, thank you.
All right, John, next on our agenda is the discussion of the 2 deliverables of the Kevin Irwin contract.
And by separate mailing, we sent out a copy of the scope of work that Kevin Irwin was operating under and the 2 different packets that he delivered to us. Just a reminder, he will be at the next meeting. He did ask a while ago, and I sent out reminders that if you had any particular questions or comments about your review, your initial review, to let him know. This way he would be better prepared to answer specific questions for you when he is in front of you. And I have sent him copies of the comments that we have in already. Dennis, as you know, supplied some comments, and Dave supplied some comments. They're in your packet. So just a reminder, if at any point, depending on how far the discussion goes today, you want to supplement today's discussion with some additional comments, we'll get those to Kevin, and he'll be in front of you on August the 11th.
Right, I know, Tori, you're not going to be here, so I want to certainly provide the information, or provide the opportunity for you to give your comments, but I don't know, we probably want to address some of these issues when he's here, so.
I know, I'm very, very, very disappointed that I'm not going to be here when he does his presentation, because it's probably one of the ones that I think is the most important at a timely, but I'm going to see my dad. So that's just the way it's going. So I guess I could write out these questions. Again, I thought Dennis, a lot of the things you said were really good in yours, and there's certain things I don't understand, like under maps, why is a 1953 aerial map more accurate, but a 2004, 99, and 2000 maps aren't accurate? I don't understand how sometimes he comes about, and then he talks about, we suggest the city, through an administrative process, work with private landowners to obtain confirmation of existing conditions. I brought this up before, and I think that if someone were talking about trying to make decisions about my land use, I wouldn't necessarily say, well, come on in and put a rain gauge on my land, because then you can decide whether I can build on it or not build it, or sell it or not sell it, or if you're going to eminent domain it. I just don't see, it's a pie-in-the-sky idea that's not practical, and I am boots on the ground with the people who own property out there on a daily basis, and if they're willing seller, they're happy to sell if they want to sell. But I don't understand how, if without the threat of eminent domain, if you're going to raise land up to store water, I understand in order for it to percolate properly, it has to be a little bit higher. You're going to have to berm it. If there are a couple holdouts in there, what are we going to do? And there are people out there that don't want to live anywhere else, or they'd already be living somewhere else. And I just think that there's just a lot of feeling out there about owning their property and wanting to have some say, not necessarily wanting to develop it or increase density at all. But all of a sudden, land acquisition is a big thing, and also the prices of the land out there. There's a lot of variable in what people think you can get land for. You can get land inexpensively when you eminent domain, because the strong arm of the law comes down, artificially blights it, and then takes it. But if a willing seller wants to sell their land, they're not talking about selling for $30,000 an acre, because there's nowhere else you can buy 5 acres and have your horse and raise your kids with your dogs and your ponies at $30,000 an acre. So it's just a little bit of a pie in the sky, and I was afraid when he was hired that it was going to be a little bit of pie in the sky, and I think it's a bit of a boondoggle, but that's just.
And maybe it makes sense for us as a committee to come out and say, I certainly, for one, personally, would not support eminent domain being used in the DRGR. I don't think there's a need for that. So I'm all for willing seller, but I hear residents concerned about eminent domain, and I know Kevin's suggestions are quite aspirational, but just because he put a pink mark or purple mark or whatever color it was on your property doesn't mean that's the end all and be all. He's making a suggestion, not that we have to agree with it. I think his suggestion is 100% aspirational. It's probably not realistic at all, which I don't appreciate. I mean, I'd rather have a realistic proposal that is cost effective. So I for one would go on record saying I would not personally support eminent domain being used in the DRGR.
I'm grateful for that, because neither would I. Willing seller is fine, but I believe that if you looked in the history books, you'd see that Southern Critical Crew was somebody's suggestion once too.
Yep.
And it caused a lot of pain.
I understand. And we're only an advisory committee. We don't have any,
Right.
true political power. We have some
True.
suggestive power. So, for what that's worth, Fred.
Well, I think really you're into several different possibilities. I know at least one of the speakers said she really didn't want to. There's been so much change in Bonita Springs. She didn't want to see anything more happen. She wanted to raise her family and all that. Well, that would play into one option, which is you leave the DRGR basically as it is, except try and clean up some of the worst problems out there. That's one option. That is an option. There's another option, which is extreme at the other end, which is you implement the biggest option of the Baracco plan, which I suspicion if she was that upset about changing the way Kevin Irwin had proposed, she probably wouldn't like that a whole lot better. Then there may be another. There's different extremes. There's these two opposite points, but one of the options would be that you leave it there as it is, because it does, I believe, and there may be some difference at the table on this, it does contribute storing a lot of water during the heavy rainy seasons that this year for some reason that hasn't happened yet, but as we had in previous years. So there are different options. I would also agree with what Scott said, that I would least like to see anything to where you had to do eminent domain, because that creates a whole nother community divisive issue and all that. So.
I also
I'm
live
sorry,
in
Mike.
Southern Critical Crew, and I was never in favor, and I am not now, of eminent domain either. But I don't think Kevin Irwin's suggesting it. He said when he talks about cooperation on ground truthing something, all he's saying is don't be going on somebody's property without their permission and sticking stuff up or putting things in. It's a cooperation is the key word there. So
I think well, back to what Fred was saying, that the areas, I think that Tori and the others that spoke, Baracco wasn't proposing high density there anyway. He was pretty much saying do 1 to 5, 1 to 3. It was so he had a variable density on where density might be appropriate. But regardless of that, I think this issue of the willing seller, as I mentioned in my comments, the last piece that Lee County bought, which was in '09, was $15,000 an acre for a pretty big piece, the Hidden Cypress Preserve. So if you're getting that and that seller made a few bucks, well then he's willing to sell. Otherwise, what you can't do, I think, is assume that there might be 1,000 additional acres of private lands purchased for any water management solution plan. So in my view, we should be looking at how do we update the stormwater master plans we have for water quality and quantity, and we can assume variable density choices, but once you start assuming restoration, and you can also assume private developers that might do filter marshes and conservation areas as part of a development plan, which I think is normal. But once you start assuming big swaths of land to be purchased by willing sellers, you really have an unknown that you really can't plan anything. And I think that's the problem I see, is that the very specific things that we've said that we'd like to have either in our parking lot or things that we'd like to see in Spring Creek, opening flowways, rehydrate certain, where does the pumping go? How do you handle the mine? These aren't addressed, and I don't see how an ecologist can address those. I see that as somebody that's a hydrologist doing that. I mean, so I don't know how you can lead this with an ecological restoration plan when what we really need are water issues, not ecological restoration. I mean, that's a component, but it's not the driver. We have ecological areas that need to be rehydrated and restored, like the Jefferson Lane and the Pine Lake and the Hidden Cypress. And I'm sure there's other areas for water quality, filter marsh areas, and flowway improvements, no question about it. But that, again, to me, is a hydrology exercise plan and design element, as well as low-impact development that goes with that helps our both water quality, quantity, and water resources. So I just don't see this going where we need it to go to get to solving the water first. I think this is, let's do ecological restoration first. And I'm sorry, but I mean, it's kind of brutal, but that's the way I see it.
No, I tend to agree with that. Any other comments for this week, or do we want to wait for Kevin? I mean, a lot of this, I'm sure Kevin will be able to answer or address, so.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. And Tori, maybe you can email John your comments
I
or
will.
questions. I wrote down the one about the map accuracy issue, but let's move on to discuss the parking lot issues so far. And again, I think first things first, I like the format, breaking it down by topic, so thank you for that.
Let me just give a brief overview for folks who might be listening, just to put in context what we tried to do based on comments and input from the task force over the course of the last few meetings is identify in our parking lot potential recommendations to go to council, and they are divided up into, just for purposes of discussion, water quantity issues, water quality issues, drinking water or water supply issues, and then we have some miscellaneous stuff. We also divided those into project-oriented recommendations and policy-oriented recommendations to try to distinguish between things that are actually to be built or things that we can put into place to encourage or drive growth in a particular direction or not. So we have the policy issues and the project issues. The last thing you have in this this packet piece is what could be a ranking form, a ranking sheet, and the idea would be that once the task force is comfortable with articulating some of those recommendations, then you would basically rank them, judge them, prioritize them, so that when they go to council, council would see that, for example, water quality project A is your highest priority, your highest ranked one, followed by water supply policy 2, whatever it turns out to be. But in order to give the council a tool where they can, in a kind of a snapshot, get an idea of how these things lay out, and again, wherever possible, those recommendations would come tied to a timing variable, a responsible party variable, whether or not it's internal, external, another agency, whatever, and where possible, and this might be the trickiest part, cost estimates. So that's at least the goal, and we'll see how close we can get.
So I assume we're going to table this in the parking lot for now. Just, you're telling us the format, which I like. but
If you're
until we're
okay
done,
with that, does that kind
I
of make
like it.
sense? Okay.
And the only, I don't want
say
to,
the responsible party is pretty important because all of this isn't city costs and yeah.
Well, you can see from the draft that we put together of recommendations or parking lot items that have come forward, my guess is a great majority of these things are not city-driven, so.
right. And I certainly, I like to prioritize or rank these. However, at the same time, I don't want the council to get the illusion that the ones that are low on the ranking aren't important. So the fact that you give us a option to comment on it, we can say, this one is low on the priority list only because it's so expensive, not because it's not important or something. Okay, good, thank you.
Just
oh, sorry. Go
one
ahead.
thing to add to that, having various policy recommendations I think is good. To me, having a map that really shows where water should be going, where should be rehydrated, is going to be important. I didn't really see that in what Kevin put together. But prior to the last task force meeting, when Eric Livingston came down, the Conservancy invited Eric, Roger Kopp, Jim Beaver, Ananta Nath, and then Brenda Brooks was on the phone to just ask them as the experts. No one was paid. They came of their own volition, volunteered their time. But just to say, okay, here is a large map of the Bonita DRGR. What do you see at a 10,000, 20,000 foot level where water may need to go in order to solve kind of the solution of the whole, and then how you get there starts in with the more specific policies. So my staff is working on that. I'm certainly not brilliant enough to do GIS, so my staff's working on that.
That's great.
They'll get feedback from all of those experts, and I'll provide that for the next agenda packet, just so we have a visual of, for example, the mine. I think the mine is part of the solution. So I was a little disappointed that it really wasn't addressed in Kevin's report. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know we have that. And then, maybe that will provide a bit more specificity as to, you have a large landowner, okay, have a portion of their land be part of a filter marsh. Then what the city determines for the balance of that land is really a city council decision. But how do you make all these pieces fit together? So I'll provide that for the
But-
next meeting.
I have a question for
Mhm.
you, Nicole. Was there any discussion about that comment Kevin Irwin had made about the Keel Canal and the possibility of using it as something for storage?
This was prior to his
Oh, it was? Yeah.
report. Yeah, this was
That would be
back
interesting
in
to
June
throw that into
16th.
the mix on that effort.
Yeah, I think on that too, whether it would be additional excavation for a filter marsh or a bypass thing for the, there'd have to be that kind of a design element
Yeah.
with it, I think.
Yeah.
Not just the canal itself.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
not at all. But I mean, it's a novel idea, and
Yeah.
it's already owned.
Yeah, no, I think, and there's physically room for that already in the acquired lands there. There might be one or two little pieces that would
Sure,
have to be
oh,
bought.
of
but-
course.
Nicole, on your, what you've got, is this your group, or is this a consortium of groups doing what you're talking about? Is this
Well,
Conservancy?
the Conservancy took the input from that discussion that
Oh,
day.
okay.
And mapped it in GIS and
Okay.
then has sent it out to them and asked them.
Do you all have this, which has the actual drainage basins that are mapped by the city and where the water goes under 75 and that sort of thing? Do they have that? Because that.
Yeah, that was one of the maps that we had out on the
Okay.
table
Yeah, 'cause I was gonna
for
say,
looking
it
at.
seems to me that the integrity of that master drainage plan that was adopted by the city and the Water Management District needs to be acknowledged or kept. I mean, there might be some changes, because we've talked about maybe sending water to Spring Creek or stuff like that
Right,
from
right,
Cypress, the Hidden
So
Cypress.
What
But-
exactly again are you, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that make sure the integrity of where the water goes and where it's already been mapped to go is kept yeah, okay.
So you're having the mapping people go through the flowways within the RGR, or?
What we had done, we asked kind of a number of experts in the field, okay, how would you solve the water issues, the water quantity, water quality issues? Would you utilize the mine as
Right.
part of a reservoir system? Where on larger properties might a filter marsh work, not using all of the property, but a portion of it? If you're going to use a portion of it, on which side, and then the balance of that land would be up to the city of what they wanted to allow there as far as additional density. Where would connectivity make sense? Maybe a linear filter marsh, for example, using linear right-of-ways for additional filter marsh, because if you're going to have reservoir and filter marsh to the north, you need to be able to connect it to the rest of the hydrological system. So just getting, like I said, the 10,000-foot level of, on a map,
Does that
this.
mean from the air?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, just at a very, broad-based level, not saying acquire this 5-acre parcel or this 20-acre parcel, but just in general, here's how the water could flow. And then.
So what would the owners of that property, how would that impact the city then could obviously make a decision of whether, will allow you on this 300 acres to increase density on the west side, but not on the east, for example. But how would it affect all the individual property owners that are in your paths, whatever paths those might be?
I'll take a look, but I think we really tried to stick with those larger parcels. Like I
Okay.
said, we're not talking eminent domain, and none of this might even be acceptable to the task force. I don't know. I just thought, since we had Eric down here and we had all of these people with expertise, why not toss a map out to them and see what they have to say? It can either be accepted, rejected, accepted in part by the task force, but it's a visual. So I'll provide it as a visual, and certainly any feedback and comments from the task force would be welcome.
Who is leading that?
Jeremy France from our staff
Okay.
is
And then.
doing the GIS work.
Okay. Well, as far as the locations of flows and marshes, and is he doing that, or is that kind of a?
He is mapping out from what Jim Beaver Roger Kopp, Eric Livingston, Ananta Nath, and Brenda Brooks, who participated somewhat by phone, what they had
Okay.
recommended as generalized ideas.
If it's on the large land, I would suggest if it's the large landowners that you, maybe before it comes to this group, you meet with them and say, here's what, because I think you probably get some good positive feedback, or some say, hey, we can't do that, but we can do this. I mean, so there might be a good interaction there that you could bring back to this task force then too.
Yeah, well, I
'Cause
think
know you talk with the mine and you know, they said, well,
Right,
what do you know,
right.
But,
Well, I'll share it with the task force, and I don't want to get out ahead of the task force on this, but once we get completed, I just want to share it with you, and then if there's merit, can approach the landowners. I'd be happy to do that.
I mean, I applaud your efforts, and I think it's great. I think I'm going to express my discomfort. I think this is no different than having a group of developers get together and hire ask a bunch of their experts that they've paid a ton of money to come up with some great ideas for the DRGR. They're going to come back with their own plans.
Well, nobody was paid, so it is different than that.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of developers who pay a bunch of engineers and surveyors and mappers tons of money who can call and say, hey, I need a favor, don't charge me this time. I think we've got to consider this.
Never paid these people. So.
Okay, well.
But there's an agenda. There's a
Yeah,
recognized
I mean, I
agenda
guess,
of the
I think
people.
I would have loved the opportunity to have that as a maybe a community workshop, where we all could be there and all provide our input. I applaud the efforts.
I agree. Unfortunately, this forum isn't conducive to it. You know what? I'll share it with you, and if the task force hates it, then that's the end of it.
And if you want to get a developer effort together, go ahead. You
That's
we'll
not
take
the
a look
point.
at
That's
that
certainly
too.
not the point.
It's science.
I appreciate the effort. Believe me, I do. I think it's probably going to be a fantastic tool. I just think we need to keep it in context.
Is there, well, I know we probably maybe hashed this because when we were sitting around the round table and I thought we were going to have that forum too, and that's why when I did these maps, I thought we'd be sitting around and maybe doing some overlays and that sort of thing, but we're not doing
Yeah,
that.
that's
But
what I had hoped.
is there a chance of maybe setting that up, and maybe this is a legal question, but having a community forum and say, hey, here's your ideas, here's somebody else's ideas, and you got maps and overlays and drawings, and you've got the private landowners, you've got your groups that you brought in, and and you basically look at it as a workshop, and you might have a plan A, B, C, and and
We
you
could
like
maybe
these-
have one meeting, not the next one, because I'm not going to be here, but the one after that, where we did set it up as a table. If it's on the TV and it's public, we could change the format for that one meeting and.
Yeah, it would just be its
hunker
own
down
meeting,
over-
its own workshop.
over the
I mean, it doesn't
maps,
have to
yeah.
be in this forum at all, yeah.
Right.
I like it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean,
I think, because we've gone
I
so
think that would be
far
quite
with
helpful.
consultants and ideas, and we got our parking lot, and some of them jive and some of them don't. It might be a good time to bring all that together, and not that you're all going to get a consensus, but, you get multiple ideas, and you kind of know then you can interact, just like you've done with the mine. You say, well, I can't do this, but maybe I can do that, and, yeah, I can do, you can put the pump over there if you want, that's better.
And I guess it's the only reservation I have, Nicole, it was, again, you're saying mostly the larger properties, but again, it's always been a little difficult for me to understand. I know it's how it's done, that it's done from 10,000 feet, but I really think some of it, needs to be done on the ground, and that's why I was saying to you, does that mean that people from Tallahassee and all these different experts are flying around and looking at a map and going, oh, wow, that looks nice? I mean, I know it's not as simple as that, but it is a little bit because the land is altered, and I just hate to see somebody flying around over other people's property telling them.
See, that's why Kevin talks about the ground truthing, because he deals with GIS and maps and the big picture view, the 10,000 foot, 20,000 foot picture a lot, but then he gives a lot of conversation about ground truthing
Well, I
too,
like
and
that.
that's the very thing
Yeah.
that he mentioned when he wanted cooperation from landowners so that you can ground truth. You can go in and make sure you're right about the big picture. They're both equally important.
And I think the people who participated are familiar with the area. And for example, under water quality number 4, there should be 400 to 500 acres of
Yeah.
additional storage. okay, if we agree that there should be, and I think there does need to be more storage, well, where does that go? And if that's done just at random because property owner X says, I'll give you 100 acres, you have to have some sort of visual to say additional storage in these areas, experts agree could be beneficial. So that's what this is. It's trying to get a visual out there so that you can get to these very specific policy recommendations.
And I think I might even suggested that 400 or 500 acres, because you got a couple thousand acres of undeveloped, and you're going to get 20 or 25% of drainage areas with that, if it's developed or not, maybe. But with that, again, it gets back into looking at making sure that
Here, Dennis.
area of that 400 or 500 acres
Here, Dennis.
maintains its integrity.
Dennis, for the record.
I'm coming back.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm just want to put the map up. Make sure that those areas are in the right areas that do maintain the integrity of where the water's flowing, and it ultimately flows across 75. So it really, between the retention and the filter marshes and the flowways themselves, that's what I was getting at. That yes, you're going to have 400 or 500 acres, and there are some limitations. Yeah, you can't put it all in one place. You're right. I guess you could if it all worked there, but you'd have to pump it.
Or the Kiel Canal. A lot of room in there.
Well, some of it goes there and some of it doesn't go there now. You've got a couple basins that flow to Lightner and Rosemary that don't even go there right now, yeah.
Oh, there was one other point I wanted to bring up, that he mentioned about taking some of the water south to the Cocohatchee. And it was my understanding when they had a flowway originally designed, and where they're out blasting right now in East Bonita, building thousands of homes, that the water would go across Bonita Beach Road and then down, and that was nixed, I think, by Collier County. From what I understand, some of the water coming from those East Bonita developments comes back across under Bonita Beach Road and still into the Kiel Canal, that Collier County is not taking water to the south.
I think you're right about that.
Right, so that in his...
Yeah, I thought that a portion of that connection was going to be reestablished.
That's what I thought. I think
Yeah,
John can probably
yeah.
fill us in on that.
And I think he's mentioned this before.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
John Dolmer. Everything I've seen shows the water going to the south. In fact, the
Yes.
first phase of the project deals specifically with the flowways. And those flowways are working water, generally speaking, from the northwest to the southeast. One is the western boundary of the project, and the other one is a little bit further to the east. And those projects go into some of the preserve area and then filter into Collier County. If
Oh,
you want to
good.
hand me the microphone, I could point it out to you
Oh,
on the
sure.
map.
Yeah, BioWare.
And this is the Bonita National Project you're talking about?
Correct. It's the Bonita National Project. What you'll see is right over here.
Could you describe where you are?
I am at the very end of the paved section of Bonita Beach Road. And you'll find that follows the very western boundary of the Bonita National property and goes into this preserve area to the south.
And then what?
And then it just flows,
Is there a slough leading down through there, or what?
yes. But it's not nearly as defined or as clear as moving the water from here to here.
Yeah, but I didn't think it was.
I guess the question that, from the early days when I was involved, was how much water? And I don't know if that's ever been defined of, well, how much are we talking about? Is it, because I think there was always a concern that maybe if you send too much water, you drain the top, and
I don't have the exact numbers. I can bring those back to you or send them to Mr. Gucciardo to forward off. Either way, be happy to do it.
Thanks, John. Did you have another question for John? Or?
No, I think all of these things, I was talking to Mr. Flood the other day about this after the last meeting, that it's very difficult to plan, and Mr. Irwin actually touched on this too. We're dealing with the very end of the project, and it's hard when we don't know what Lee County's doing with Edison, the effects of the work that Water Management is doing in the Southern Crew aren't felt because they haven't been able to complete the project. That flowway's not working yet because they haven't finished the development, and so all those things are going to impact us so much. It's interesting to be trying to make decisions be proactive
Right.
in making those decisions. It puts another layer of difficulty on us other than if those projects were done and then we'd know exactly how much we needed to do.
Right. And for the parking lot items, there are quite a few that are really good, but if we get too specific, they're probably not going to be helpful, and if we're too general, they're not going to be helpful. So, for example, when on number 12 underwater quantity, it just says adding to the inventory of open space designated for water storage by establishing reservoirs. That's a hard and fast statement, as opposed to adding to the inventory open space designated for water storage by considering establishing reservoirs when and where cost effective. I think the more general we can get and leave staff for the specifics, leave the specifics to staff. Number 14, for example, it says articulate a higher prioritization of stormwater quantity projects identified in the stormwater master plan update relative to the DRGR. Again, I don't know if I think that would be that may be foolish, because I'd rather articulate a priority given a cost benefit effectiveness. And I know, again, I mentioned cost is a factor, effectiveness is a factor, but a higher priority for some sort of cost benefit analysis, I would be in favor of. I think we need to be somewhat careful about these hard and fast specifics.
I have one on that paper too.
Yeah, please. Yeah. I mean, I'm just talking in generalities. I mean,
Right.
I don't think we're there to the specifics yet, but I'm saying when we're adding to the parking lot, if we can refine these a bit.
I'm going to refine this one just a little bit, because it says when Bonita Grand is widened for additional traffic capacity.
Are
I'd
you on
rather-
quality or quantity?
Pardon me?
Quality or quantity?
Number
I'm
10.
on number 10.
Number 10 of water
right in the
quantity.
front, in the
Okay.
Oh, sorry, quality.
Yeah, quality in the front, number 10. When Bonita Grand is widened for additional traffic capacity, I would change that to if and when, because that may not happen. It may not be widened. Secondly, it mentions it mentions canal also allow for the extension of the Bonita Trail into Crew. That's Cullum's Bonita Trail, in case anyone I don't want to see that name of that trail abbreviated all the time like that. If you're going to abbreviate,
My
just call it
apologies.
Cullum's Trail rather than Bonita Trail. 'Cause that was officially adopted by the council.
Point taken.
That's its legal official name, Cullum's Bonita Trail. So.
Do I need to make room? Do I need to make room for your ego?
On all of these, as Scott indicated, this was a combination of my pulling stuff out of things that were verbalized at some meetings, things that were provided in writing. Obviously, Dave's stuff came in after the packet was put together, so that's why you got about 41, I think, from him.
I did kind of
on
know
there.
that. I just
But-
was taking advantage of
No,
an
no,
opportunity for a little cheap
no,
humor there.
no, believe me, I get you. My fault entirely on Cullum's Bonita Trail. It will show up that way. But the point I was trying to make was that as we get closer to as the task force gets closer to actually adopting some of these, I would appreciate it. Give me those thoughts about how to fine tune the language, because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right.
It is a potential source of some interesting conversation about how specific or how general you want these things to
Yeah.
be. So that's on you guys, and I'll wait to kind of get that feedback and blend it in.
What brought it to my mind was Dave's got some really good ones, but he also, for lack of a better term, just regurgitates some of either what Public Works is already doing, or he says like build number 4, build number 5, build number 6. That's too specific. What we need is a policy that prioritizes the projects,
There you go.
as opposed to being aspirational.
I think that if the time comes to, if we are agreed, and although we don't really have any power, I think in the parking lot or in some sort of language, we could state that it is the feeling, at least so far, that we are not in favor of eminent domain, and put it to the city council that, Audrey brought up the point of the cost, and then I think that also Mr. Irwin brought up that eminent domain isn't always cost effective because of the fighting that you have to do legally. And so putting that in the language would go a long way for me.
Yeah, and I'll
It's been my experience that eminent domain is far from cost effective.
Right.
So to
And-
make sure
And I
that
want to
the
clarify
city-
my point earlier. There may be a small piece that may need to be taken, and when I say small piece, 30 feet by 50 feet for a
Right.
pump, something like that, I'm not going to get up in arms about. I would be very opposed to the city council taking multiple parcels by
So
eminent
maybe we
domain.
could put that in the draft when we finally put it together, so that that's clear to, because there are
I
different
think that's a
people have
policy.
different.
I think that's a policy we should put
But
in there.
Okay, good.
I think the exception might be, and the column says if Bonita Grand and Terry Street are on the 2035 plan to be widened, it may never happen from a funding perspective. That's why I asked that question to DOT about the costs, because it's a lot, it's better, 45 million is a lot cheaper than 110, but it's still a lot of money. But if it's never, it's in the plan to be widened, and if it's widened, likely you'll have right-of-way takings.
You're
to
right.
do
No,
that.
you're right. You're right.
Just like you had at
And I,
Shangri-La and,
right. I'm really talking in the water sense of
Yeah,
taking
I
for
understand.
water
I understand.
storage or
Yeah.
something. like that.
Likewise,
I
if
just-
the Kiel Canal was utilized as a storage, there'd be some edge pieces, some
There might be some edge
matter of
pieces.
footage, or a couple of yards. There'd be some stuff where you had to have a little equipment or whatever, just to keep things balanced, but.
I think what you all are getting at, though, is for restoration purposes or things like that. And, there may be some really critical water projects that may require some of that if you don't, if they're really needed. Now, the question is, where would that be? I don't know. With the landowners, what you're saying, Nicole, is you can say, hey, here's, or the city can say, you would develop here, you got to build this filter marsh there. So that can happen as part of that negotiation, whatever. I still like the idea, though, of that workshop.
Yeah, me too.
Is there some way, I don't know if Audrey needs to address that, but is there some way, say in the next couple of months, we could do that? Maybe Nicole's folks have time to do their stuff.
It's not a legal issue, as long as it's
mean-
an advertised meeting.
And I'd say
And
this is,
actually-
we need tables, we need room for people to put things on the walls and pin up stuff, and, and it's probably not this room.
It's probably not in this room.
Well, I don't know. I don't know
Have
if
to
you
have the
can.
microphones and
The
that
TV.
was, and
Yeah.
the TV and.
This is the
You have
only
to
room
have
that
all
I
that?
can, this is the only room I can televise it in, if you want to televise, then
Well, I mean, do we have to? I mean,
That-
when you
again-
have a public workshop like that, I mean, is it not?
Okay, let me start from the beginning, Dennis.
But-
We can hold it anywhere you want, as long as it's an advertised meeting.
Yeah.
Within the city of Bonita Springs. I thought that the group had indicated early on that they wanted these meetings televised. This is the only room I can do that in.
How about at the Bonita, at the fire department on Bonita ground?
Yeah.
That's a fairly
tele-
open room. It's televised.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I wasn't thinking about that because we'd have to make some arrangements with them, but
Right, we
potentially.
would.
And
The bottom line is, as my normal, pattern here, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the upcoming meetings, and I already had it kind of penciled in for your second September meeting to try to work that out for this tabletop exercise workshop, basically.
That'd be
There you
great.
go.
Okay.
That would be great. Good. All right, do we have any other comments on the parking lot?
How do we get these comments back? Do we just mark them up and get them to John? I mean, how do we kind of go
I
from,
think
because there
that-
are kind of a lot, trying to go through each one of these would be here.
Could you send them to us in Word so that we could maybe do strike through underline of
That would be helpful.
recommendations?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Good.
Yeah, I see, because some of these are duplicated and some of them, they just
Again,
cross
I
over a
didn't, I
little
didn't
bit,
want
yeah.
to editorialize, so I was
You
trying to
did,
pull
you did
in
great, John.
what you guys had given me.
You did great. These are great.
A lot of them overlap, a lot of them,
Yep. Okay. Member items and reports. So Nicole, thank you for the information on crew, the Southern crew. That was helpful. The BSU, any of this we want to talk about? Dave's not here, so.
Wait till he gets here.
Dennis, did you want to talk about yours with DOT?
No, I
Mentioned it,
think
45
pretty
million's
well
better than-
explains itself. When I saw the number that had been in the system, I just said, where'd that come from? And nobody could give me an answer, so they kind of re-looked at it and said it's probably more like 45 million instead of 110, which, 110 was what was in the Brock report. That's what got my attention. I said, wow, that's a lot of money for 2.5 miles of road. So-
Right.
So, anyway, no, it is what it is there, that's all.
Okay.
I do have a question about, I guess David's not here, but I won't be here when he's at the next meeting, and that is about the, all the Collier County well field information that's coming along. It's my understanding that hydrologically, especially with the Bonita Marl, originally when I did with the last city council, we had a meeting, we went out and toured the DRGR, we went out and visited the well fields, and it was clearly mapped out the amount of distance that was required to keep the well field protected, and that it's very different in the different well fields, and particularly in the Collier County well fields. They don't have the confining layer of the marl that we have, so I'm a little bit confused why there's such a push right now with this well field Collier, all the information that I'm getting that I have been led to believe isn't applicable to our well fields. And what concerns me is that sometimes things are repeated over and over and over again until they're taken as truth. And it hasn't been vetted through the BSU, and I was also very disturbed at the city council meeting I've been watching, that there was mention of the A-team subcommittee to the Water Strategy Task Force, and that was brought up at, a personal private member came up and said that they were working hard for the Water Task Force, and I thought, the A-team subcommittee? I just needed to bring it up in front of us all, on the TV, that I didn't know that we had an A-team subcommittee.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
I don't think we have a subcommittee, do we?
we do.
I've heard references to a subcommittee, sometimes referred to as the A-team or the A-team subcommittee. My understanding is that a member of the task force has enlisted other people that they're comfortable with to help them either do research or gather things. It is not a subcommittee of the task force.
Oh.
It is not related to the task force. It is not associated with the task force. If it was, frankly, it would be subject to the same sunshine laws. I'm not particularly comfortable with hearing it referred to as the A-team subcommittee, but then again, I can't control what people call their friends, so.
John, can I?
Thank you. Do you want to address it in public comment? We're almost there.
I just want to say the A-team exists. It's not a formal subcommittee, and we have been doing research, but research for many people, not just one. That's all.
That's frankly even more troubling to
Yeah.
me. Sorry to say.
I just want another comment off to the side there. One of the things that was mentioned earlier is that we should only be addressing water, and that's it. And we've talked about economics. We've talked about things like condemnation. We have to address things like land use if you're talking about applying criteria to private land because of the voluntary nature of how you work with the private landowners. So I think we have to really make sure that we're fulfilling the task, which is to figure out if there is some solutions for the water that can be improved. One of the things, John, that I would mention too is on one of your conclusions on the first page of the your format there on the conclusion, you said it could be made worse without proper future planning. It can also be made worse or better with proper future planning. So it can be worse or better depending on future planning. So I've just not rule out that we can improve water resources with the right planning.
I have no pride of authorship
Yeah,
of any of
okay.
this stuff. Give me your suggestions.
So I'm just saying we really we can't be limited to by just saying this water because there's too many other factions that affect it.
Agreed.
Yes,
Yes.
agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just need to follow our mission, and that's important, too.
Right. Anything else on the member items and reports?
Just,
Please.
one final thing. I see that we do have a Water Management District Governing Board member here, Rick Barber. And just like to make sure that Rick did receive the letter from City Council that recommended that funding for Southern Critical
do it.
Crew
Go,
be
do it.
put into the upcoming year's budget. That was supported unanimously by the task force. So we would hope that we have your support in that as budgeting is finalized for the district.
Consider yourself lobbied.
Let the record reflect it was approved.
Can I ask
You know it.
Can I clarify, is that a district budget issue, or is that a state funding issue? I mean, is it one and the same, or is the district say, hey, we got a budget and we're going to allocate it, or do you have to say, we need more money from the state to do that? Is that a right question?
Rick, do you want to come up to the, thank you.
All right.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but thank you.
The district's budget is of course made up by the legislature in part, especially for purchases of land and Everglades projects and that sort of thing. But our ad valorem part of the budget was passed last Thursday, and I emailed Doug Bergstrom, our finance director, on Friday to see if there was any money for Southern Crew, but I've not gotten an answer yet. But we are interested in seeing the project.
So it would be a district tax.
It could come from either way.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
could
okay.
come from the legislature, or it could come from our ad valorem tax base.
Thanks, Rick.
Is that all?
Ask him when it'll be done.
I was going to say, when do you think you'll hear?
I'm sure we'll hear as soon as he does. So thanks, Nicole, for bringing that up. That gets us to staff updates.
Well, we've talked about a couple already, and one thing I did want to point out, you see some correspondence there between the city attorney and BSU about the Wellfield Protection Ordinance. And Tori, you're correct. I have seen myself a lot of information floating around about wellfield and wellfield protection ordinances and criteria from all kinds of places. I'm comfortable that the folks we have working on the one that applies to us in BSU will be appropriate given our particular circumstances. It is hard to sometimes ferret out good information from bad, but I'm comfortable that's being done in our case. And obviously, as they move forward, that'll be coming back to us. There's also a copy of the letter that was sent relative to the Spring Creek Restoration Plan. And I do want to say that obviously we're all glad when the council takes action to move forward on particular water projects, but in just the for full disclosure purposes, for those of you who did not see or hear that meeting later on, I actually lobbied against that on your behalf to a certain extent as your liaison. Not that I didn't think that the study is a good study, but at least from my perspective, I indicated to the council that given that we were putting together parking lot issues, and I had just finished typing some of them, I knew that that was going to show up in one form or another as part of your recommendations. I didn't know, and I told him I didn't know where it would be on the priority list, but that it would, at least I anticipated it would show up at some point, and offered that they may want to wait until they got your input about where that kind of found itself on your priority list. They decided that for whatever reasons they were more eager to pull the trigger on that than wait, and that's what they did. So in any case, I just wanted to let you know that was kind of the discussion that went on about that particular thing. Certainly not a bad thing that it's going on, but probably being done outside of the normal flow of whatever else might come out of this task.
I'm not clear, and I guess I should have looked at that more closely, the scope of that. I know we talked about it early on in the year, and then it dropped, and then it came back. But does the scope go from some of the areas that we're looking at it be actually the saltwater area from west of 41 that we're going to be dredged all the way to 75 and beyond that includes the crossing or a crossing of 75? Does that?
Dennis, I'll be honest with you. This is another situation where we weren't involved in defining the scope, so I'm not exactly sure where it's going to wind up. I know there has been some dialogue back and forth about what council indicated they would like to see. So the best I can say at this point is that The agreement and the scope that'll be attached to that agreement is in process right now. As soon as we have that, I'll be bringing it back to the group.
Yeah, because I understand that the dredging part is probably off the table because of endangered species there, but,
That's what I
but
heard,
so I
too.
don't know the
Well,
scope.
not
Mm.
necessarily. There are, I guess, 3 components now going on with Spring Creek. One is that there has been inquiry requests from residents about some mangrove trimming for navigational purposes. There's been some request and inquiry from some residents about dredging. And then we have the bigger, broader scope of a study to see what can be done in terms of Spring Creek in general, I guess, and how far upstream that goes, downstream it goes, is where the scope is being modified, I think, even as we speak.
Okay.
Those first 2 are actually moving forward separately by Public Works. Matt's been meeting with the DEP folks, and as a matter of fact, was out in the water, I think, just Friday afternoon with them to kind of look at different areas that we might actually be able to address and put in a permit for, separate from the larger study. So I don't want to make it appear like that had fallen off the table. That's just moving together on a different path.
I'd like part of my job to be able to go out on the water on Fridays.
Yeah, I made sure that Matt didn't have his pole with him. Just to
Okay, thanks.
We're almost there.
All right.
And then the last thing that I have under the staff updates, again, is the usual rundown of what I expect to see coming up. And I've got BSU, Andy Tilton, penciled in for the August 11th meeting. We also have, obviously, Kevin Irwin will be back for the August 11th meeting. I assume we'll get into more depth about his deliverables. We will, as long as the group is okay with this, keep as a recurring agenda item the parking lot items, and whatever feedback you want to give me on those will keep showing up. On September the 8th, I'm still trying to lock in FGCU, and Colm, thank you very much for giving me contact information on the 2 folks that you identified from FGCU. Jim Beaver and I have kind of gone back and forth about whether or not he would be coming to another one, and I've heard, I guess, discussion about whether or not Jim Beaver would be one of the people that could talk about down the trees and how they input nitrogen levels. I'm not sure if that's...
He's probably a good in the running for that.
Is that something you would like me to pursue with him?
Yeah.
Who are the FGCU people, and what are they talking about?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, let me hand those out. 'Cause
Thank you.
And then while Cullum's handing that out, and before he fills us in on what he had in mind for that, the last piece I have is that we had originally talked about September 8th and September 22nd, but I would like to suggest that we move the 22nd in September to the 29th, if at all possible, because I won't be here on the 22nd, if that works for you.
I don't have a problem. That's works for me. I don't.
Yeah, that's fine for me.
29 is okay?
29th?
Thanks.
Cracks me up, the name of our.
Yeah, that's fine.
Colm, you want to tell us a little bit about
Well, I just wanted to recommend these 2 persons that I have on this sheet here, William Bill Mitch, and from FGCU, and Serge Thomas. Both of them specialize in ponds and water retention, that sort of stuff, and how to maximize it, how to do it. They're just high-level experts in those fields. So, pollutant removal, efficiencies for wet detention systems, and so forth. So I just wanted to make sure that they are on our invite list, both of them.
Good.
Very much our bailiwick. you know.
Yeah.
Fine. We can hold it. That's fine. We can do that some other time. I know it was really late in getting to,
That
so I
that would
apologize.
sort of tie into Nicole's mapping.
Definitely. and
Yeah.
We'd be hopefully we could have them at that.
And it would
workshop.
help us to decide what order in the parking lot we would put it in too. So that would be interesting, because it's feasibility, and that we could talk to them about cost. And
Okay. And we've heard from Alex Grant a bunch
yes,
about
you know,
a
I
UF,
have to say,
soils person.
I have contacted UF, several people up there, and I can't seem to get any interest in anybody coming down. I didn't speak to the soil department, but I spoke to a couple other departments, and I haven't gotten a
I
lot.
think we've got a USGS soils report that was pretty extensive.
I had,
So-
well, months ago, I had given to John some folks from a couple different areas or institutes, whatever, within the University of Florida that would partner with, different departments like the soils areas as well as their drainage, and they do low-impact development and everything else. But, it was kind of just put on hold because at that time, I don't think we were ready to hire more consultants, but they would charge, but you can get pretty good prices from PhDs and all that from there. But we could dust that off if you think, that would be another thing we'd want to do. But I think you'd have to look at it not just with soils, but with other guys other departments that look at vegetation, look at water, kind of tie it all together. Otherwise, we're just looking at it in a vacuum, I think.
But it does sound a little bit as if this might be part of that, the gentleman from FGCU, too. And they're a little closer than, I mean, I'm all for contacting them if they call you back and want to come. I just couldn't get the eagerness to.
Oh, to come for free, you mean?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
John, do you want to mention Matt's email? Because I read Matt's email about the status of those 8 projects, I guess, that Dave was questioning. But his last paragraph is, I think that's just gold for us. Talking about the Kent Road and Imperial River project. He said, initial calculations we've done looking at this project area indicate the city may be able to construct a project there, perhaps in conjunction with the rehydration of Pine Lake Preserve, that could handle all of the remaining 7,845 pounds of the city's 15-year nitrogen quota whilst restoring an important historical flowways habitat.
Huge.
Yeah.
I think we're done.
I was going to say, well, in terms of meeting our NPDES obligations, that would be tremendous. And we also have very strong indication that it's something that the county would be eager to work with us on. They have indicated in the past that they'd like to be doing something along those lines there. So you have land under public ownership with a willing partner, at least theoretically. Funding, of course, always becomes an issue, but I would think that is something that you guys might want to focus on for one of the more specific project recommendations.
Right. And I definitely put that in the parking lot. I read that and.
There you go.
And it just one further thing on that, it may turn out that the Kiel Canal issue, which is extension of the very same thing, might even be more readily available for that and more significant because it's deeper, wider, and already more altered than, I don't want to alter part of the natural part of the river if we can do a same thing even bigger and better a little further east where it's already a square ditch. So, that's exactly what the Kiel Canal is. It's a square-sided, square-bottomed ditch, and was, put in back in I think it was in the early '60s, but it could have been even a little earlier than that. So, that'll yet be looked at. And more about that in due course.
Good.
Anything else? All right. Public comment.
Just something about the Kiel Canal. We did approve a zoning at the commercial interchange there that talks about rehydrating Pine Lake Preserve and restoring the natural oxbow to the Imperial River. Not at the original water, and not the headwaters.
No.
And yeah, about Spring Creek. So the scope of the study is supposed to go from Edison Farms, taking in hidden cypress. Basically, that was the point, to see if there's some potential there. Go across, the interstate all the way to, getting into the bay. So that's what that was for. And to cover all those areas. Yes, we need mango trimming, we need dredging, and I don't think the dredging is opposed by, which is what I asked someone when I wanted to get that study back in January. It's a long-term study, let's get on it, because we only have a short amount of time to get there. before city council makes a decision. So I appreciate what you guys did today. Kevin Irwin had some good thoughts, but I want to reassure the people back here, I don't think you have anybody on city council. When I served on city council, I signed a document, a pledge not to take anything by eminent domain. I think you have absolutely no interest in that. Good people out to the east, don't fear. Okay, but he did lay out a certain scenario. I'm very grateful to Nicole for getting some of those people together to lay out another scenario. I think that's a good idea. Serge Thomas, he's already working with that group, with the city, with our public works department. They are going out and voluntarily with Chinip and Hyacinth Control and all these different people, teaching HOAs about pond management. It's voluntary. Right. I don't know we need to do that mandatorily. Wellfield ordinance, yes, we need one. We need to brush it up because we just have the 1995 Lee County Wellfield ordinance, and we're different than Lee County. They adopted a new one in 2007, so maybe better management practices in there. I am not absolutely comfortable with BSU being, it's kind of the fox in the hen house kind of thing. Not that they wouldn't give us a terrific job, but just a little uncomfortable about that, just as much as I'm uncomfortable about somebody calling Team A subcommittee. I'm not comfortable with that. If citizens want to get together and talk and then lobby you guys and say, hey, I got some great ideas, I think that's all good and fine. But that's a mislabeling of what the truth is. Logs are good. Okay. And I really thank you for your smart discussion. I think Spring Creek really does need to be rehydrated, and that's going to solve a lot of problems. So thank you very much for all your smart and thoughtful things you had to say today. And the last point, do not prioritize based on ability to pay, because in our stormwater master plan and our stormwater water quality plan, both quantity and quality, it just lays out you need to do these things. And I know in the stormwater, I think it's the water quantity plan, it's like $20 million without considering land acquisition already, and that's citywide. And there's lots of stuff I can see in the water quality and water quantity plan that are not in there that you could do. It only had 2 projects in East Bonita, one outside of the city limits on Bonita Beach Road, and another one which they kind of like missed because when they were building the little parking lot for the kayak launch down there, they kind of lost the opportunity to do what they needed to do there. So then there were no other projects out in East Bonita. I think there's lots of projects out in East Bonita, and if we need to get the money, well, we'll just go out and lobby for it, won't we? We'll just go out and twist some arms, Fred. Rick? Thank you very much, everybody. You're very smart.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello again, Kathy McGrath for the record. I'm just very pleased that you tried to alleviate the concerns of the residents that spoke so eloquently and passionately about the taking their property. But when I've spoken before, I wasn't only concerned about their property. I'm concerned about Mr. Irwin's proposal to purchase any property because the money just isn't available, and I don't care how much you look for grants and lobby and lobby. And you know, prior to you guys being put on the task force, I never heard at any city council meeting anyone talking about eminent domain and also about density. You know, yes, the Barack report, they showed what the land could sustain, but no one ever said, well, that's what we're going to vote for. But the other thing is, as may I say, Dennis said, because he did say, and I've said it before too, we all know, and I didn't realize it was in 2035. It seems like everything's going to happen in 2035. But 2035 is when possibly the roads will be widened, and they will. Terry Street and Bonita Grant are going to have to be widened, whether there is one bit of development out there or not. And I hope everyone realizes that, because when Logan Boulevard comes through, the people are going to have a way to do that. So, you know, everything's a compromise. When this is all over with, and I'm not too optimistic about what the outcome's going to come in February, I think we're going to be right back where we started because everyone's going to have the same mindset. Everything's a compromise. You know, it doesn't have to be X amount of units per acre, and it doesn't have to remain the way it is right now. And quite frankly, some of the proposals that I've heard about or thought about, I don't think would be detrimental to these people that are living there right now. I really don't think so. And let's remember another thing. If, and I hope, proper development is allowed with all the infrastructure, let's face it, the developers could help pay for those roads. So maybe it could happen even sooner. So, you know, let's remember, life is a compromise. It doesn't have to be all this way or that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Anyone else for public comments? I've been shirking my duties on the timer.
I'm Janet Daychuck. I just wanted to also say I'm not only worried about the eminent domain out there, but I don't think the project is needed necessary at all. Let's wait and see what the water management project does. If it works the way it's supposed to work, it should hold the water, and we shouldn't have to worry about taking more land.
Thank you.
John West, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you can remember a TV show called Dragnet.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
50 years ago. There was a sergeant in there who portrayed a member of the Los Angeles police force. And the catchphrase there was, "Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts." And it was just the facts that were contained in my paper that you received at the last meeting. We will know the value of water when we have none, when the well has run dry. Unfortunately, the response to that was from Andrew Tilton, a managing partner of Johnson Engineering, and I was really not expecting any reply because the facts were there in the letter and it didn't really need a reply. Unfortunately, he did reply, and he must have had a hangover the day that he replied because it didn't portray Johnson Engineering very well. He mentioned that in my paper I had picked two figures on two particular dates and come to the conclusion that those represented a reduction, a decline in well levels. This is not what my paper said at all. My paper said that on such and such a date, the reading was 3.57. 30 years later, it was 0.81, and the intervening figures showed a steady decline. Besides which, the USGS has on their website a list of wells that are below the normal level. The top one on that list is the one we're talking about, L2194. He goes on to say that in doing what I did, taking two figures, I could just as well have taken the figures of October 1988 and the figures of 2008, which would have showed an increase of 4 feet. Really? Well, in mentioning that, he gave out that he knew very well that USGS carries two sets of books, so to speak. One measurement is done by field measurement, and one is done by maximum daily levels. So the figures that I took were...
Go ahead and wrap up if you can. Come on,
You want me to finish?
please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. The figures that I took were the field measurements, and he mixed up the field measurements with the daily maximums. And if he knew this, I didn't at the time. I must confess, I did not know that they carried two sets of books. Afterwards, I did, because I made inquiries from USGS. What's going on? 1 minute I read one set of figures, the next minute I read another. So they told me. He could have told us that in his letter. I don't know whether he worked on this or whether someone in his office worked on it and he just signed it, but it's on Johnson Engineering paper, and I'm sorry I have to criticize it, but he is not, Johnson Engineering is not the first consultant of BSU that I have had to criticize. It happened with H2O, is that the company that did the, used to do the permitting?
It's the H2M Hill.
Yes. It happened with them. And if you think I'm picking on the engineering companies, it also happened with the auditors for Bank Florida, who I accused of being too close to the management of Bank Florida and for not qualifying their accounts, as a consequence of which...
Mr. West, could you
they-
wrap up your comments and keep
I
them to the
will, I
Water
will.
Task Force, please?
And as a consequence of which they went into receivership. So the whole tone of the letter is as if Dave had asked Johnson Engineering to bake a cake, and they, being master bakers, said, okay, we'll bake a cake for you, but we can only use rancid butter. Maybe this is what he was talking about when he said, buyer beware. We are not here to nitpick and to pick each other to pieces. We are here to supply concrete facts and figures that you can take and chew over and come to some conclusion over. And that was what I was trying to do in my paper, and I'm sorry they took it as they did. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, I am one of these people on, I don't know what team, but I don't know whether these comments are worth continuing with or not. But I've come 240 miles to attend this meeting, and I would really like to know whether I should continue to help out or whether it is not appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? All right, seeing none, our next meeting is August 11th.
Got it.
We're adjourned.
Thank you very much. Those comments coming in.